Anwen strode ahead of the others in her group, trying to keep pace with the women leading them. They said a quick trot she had a hard time keeping. Despite being somewhat used to being on the move, she was worn out and ready to call it a day. Sweat trickled down her body as she struggled to keep up with everyone. Tyler and Walter held back, giving her the right of leading them, even if they both knew she didn't feel like doing it. Tyler had yet to reveal himself as a dragon to these mages and wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. He had no idea if they guessed at his origins or if they assumed he was a really athletic mortal. He hoped for the latter, but wouldn't be surprised if they suspected otherwise.
How much further do you think?
Walter asked between breaths. The pace was a tiring one, even for him, especially since they kept it for at least an hour. Didn't these natives ever get tired, he wondered? Well, he supposed it made sense for them to be in good shape, considering where they lived. The further in they went, the more signs they saw of habitation. The signs were subtle, such as footholds on trees, vines, or ropes for climbing. Another half an hour brought them to the outskirts of what looked like a thriving village. Far from primitive, the structures were obviously made by hand. They did lack a more modern look to them, even with the shingles made from carefully cut lengths of wood. By the time they'd entered what had to be the main square of the village, Anwen was ready to collapse. She gulped in air like it was going out of style, trying to still her racing heart. The mages may have led them to their little nest, so to speak, but that didn't mean they'd let them stay there long. She half suspected they'd denounce them as fakers and either send them on their way or imprison them. Neither idea sounded appealing. The women created a loose circle around their visitors. It almost seemed as though they were afraid they'd try to do something stupid. At the least, it was clear they did not trust the newcomers, and Anwen found she wished Kern had come with them. They had to know who the Nerium was. It was possible they knew Tyler too, but she doubted he'd willingly transform until he was sure of the situation. Another woman approached them from one of the further buildings. Her entire demeanor screamed authority in a way only Margot's could match. All those present, including a few men, bowed in respect as she approached. Though they seemed to have cut themselves off from society, their clothes were modern, but their attire was more practical than most. Walter half expected to find them in the native attire of the far reaches, with tunics and loincloths. He wasn't sure if he was disappointed or relieved. Walter took in the woman who had approached them. She had a strong jawline with dark hair. Her brown eyes seemed able to pierce anything they looked at. Her skin, though not fair, was not as dark as his. It reminded him of the tanned southern tribes he'd encountered while overseas, and her fit complexion told him she was more than capable of giving him a run for his money. It was somehow alluring. The woman approached several yards from Anwen, scrutinizing those in front of her.
So, these are the strangers,
she said, her voice low and a bit smoky. She looked towards Anwen with a piercing gaze that seemed bent on trying to see through her. There was a hint of frustration behind it as well.
Who are you, and what do you want?
The mage who had escorted them stepped forward.
Walker Leslie, this one,
she pointed to Anwen,
knows the riddle set forth when we split from the others. Yet she has not told us her name or why she has sought us out.
Leslie pursed her lips in thought.
Thank you, Sarah. Those who seek the lost mages must have a reason.
She mused as she moved towards Anwen.
And yet, I can glean nothing from my initial observations. Tell me your name and why you are here.
Anwen stood her ground as the woman circled her, coming far too close for comfort.
My name is Anwen K. the Porter. I am the daughter of Margot K. the Pack and James Porter. I come seeking the lost mages to bring them back to the mountain of Tarragon as was foretold.
Though she had not spoken in a formal manner on purpose, it seemed to suit the situation.
Many days have we traveled. We have sought the clues placed for us to find. The ruined city of Solva, the beacons, the dry lake, and now here.
The walker looked thoughtful. She paused in front of Anwen before moving back to join the circle of her followers.
Anwen Kada?
She said in a somewhat skeptical tone.
Are you then claiming to be the Kada? And what proof do you have of your claim?
Her tone gave Anwen a moment of pause. It almost seemed as if there was a joke to be had, or some sport she hoped to make. If that were the case, Anwen would not fall to the bait.
Yes, I claim to be that Keda.
She replied. Despite her even tone, her legs trembled, only part of which came from fatigue.
And as proof, I offered this twofold.
Anwen pulled the master key out from under her shirt, holding it high with the same hand the mage ring rested on. The two metal objects clinked together. Sunlight streamed down from overhead, making them both flash as with blue and green fire.
If you want to doubt it, go ahead.
She added, challenging them as an unusual anger filled her. She hadn't chosen this life or this path, but to have someone doubt it was more than she wanted to deal with. The past month had been one indignity after the other. Red light flashed from a similar chain around Leslie's neck, though the gem there hung for all to see. The woman pursed her lips at Anwen's tone, but quickly schooled her face. Then her expression softened as the corners of her mouth lifted, and she laughed.
My, but we're all so serious. I think this meeting might be cause for celebration. For I know only a dragon gem can make another react as mine has. I accept your claim.
Her tone seemed to imply something more, but didn't give away what. Walter released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Things could have gone in a not-so-good direction. And from a strategic standpoint, he knew they wouldn't have had the upper hand, even with Tyler there. Leslie's words seemed to release an invisible hold on the other villagers. They all dispersed to their previous tasks as if nothing had happened, except for Sarah, her second in command. Laughter and talking filled the void where silence had been before. The tension released, even in Tyler's shoulders as she approached them once more.
Come. I'm sure you are tired after the pace my people have set.
Anwen was more than willing to follow the two mages into the nearest building where it was cooler. Air blew from some unseen force, further chilling the air to something more bearable. She wiped sweat from her brow, letting her shoulders sag in relief.
Oh my gosh,
she said under her breath, pausing to stay a few steps back from their host. Tyler flanked Anwen's side with Walter on the other. Though the tension had ceased, there was still cause to remain on guard. These mages had chosen to separate themselves from the others. Their decision had isolated them from the rest of the world. It was anyone's guess how that had changed things with them, even from what Tyler remembered. Cultures tended to evolve over time, even if only a generation or two.
Don't be shy,
Leslie admonished. She now seemed to be at ease as she sauntered over to a cooler and pulled out, of all things, cans of soda. She tossed them to the three new arrivals without having to look at them. Walter caught his with a bit of a shock, sure the others mirrored his feelings on the matter.
Whoa, how did she do that?
He asked Tyler, leaning around Anwen to ask. Her movements accentuated what his suspicions had already told him. This woman was something to be reckoned with. Leslie laughed at Walter's comment.
You will find there are a great many things we can do that will surprise you. Just because we live in the middle of nowhere does not mean we are isolated. Besides, there are some creature comforts hard to live without.
She gave a wink as she opened a can of soda and took a drink. Sarah took on an almost defensive position next to her leader's side, arms folded across her chest. She didn't go for a drink, nor did she offer to speak any more than she already had outside. Instead, she sort of glared at their guests. Tyler set his can down on a convenient counter, nudging Anwen ahead of him.
I know we only arrived a while ago,
He started.
but we didn't come just for a belated family reunion. Isn't that right, Anwen?
He hadn't missed Leslie's tone from earlier. Sure, she hadn't completely accepted Anwen's claims. Anwen set her can down next to Tyler's.
he's right.
She sighed, though part of her really wished he'd let them relax a bit before bringing it back up.
A lot's happened since you guys left.
Leslie ushered them further in to where a couch sat across from a lounger. She sprawled in the chair, kicking off her shoes to reveal bare feet.
I hope you don't mind.
She apologized.
I don't like wearing shoes unless I have to. I miss the feel of the earth underfoot too much.
She swung her legs over one side of the chair so she sort of lay across it in a semi-reclining position.
So, what do you have to tell me? I can guess from your serious expressions, it must be something big.
Once more, the Walker's lieutenant situated herself off to one side of her leader. This time Sarah stood with arms loosely clasped behind her back. Despite the somewhat more relaxed stance, her expression did not change. Walter glanced at Tyler, certain she didn't mean him. For his part, he felt pretty laid back. He was sitting on a comfy couch, in an air-conditioned room with a soda. The only other thing he could ask for was a good plate of food, and maybe a sports magazine. The present company made up for that, though. He was not sorry for thinking it either. Tyler gave Anwen a sideways glance, checking to see if she'd take the initiative or if he'd have to. He decided he should.
Well, you could say that.
He admitted.
I don't know if you figured out or not yet, but the gates of Tarragon are open again. That and the dragons are awake.
The walker gave a sort of funny smile.
I kind of figured. On both counts.
She drawled.
We all felt a disturbance. About a month back, didn't we?
She glanced towards Sarah for confirmation before turning her attention back to her guests.
I can only assume that's what caused it.
She looked towards Anwen and the key she had placed back around her neck.
I am curious how you came to have both the mage ring and the master key, though. We all thought the one lost.
Anwen fiddled with the key in question, her fingers tracing the folded wings of the dragon figure.
My dad was the last of the keykeepers. At least until I was born.
She confessed as she looked down at the ring.
I guess you could say I'm sort of a taboo in that regard. But Karen led my mother to my dad. So, there you have it.
Brows raised, Leslie seemed to give Anwen more consideration.
One who holds the blood of both lines, eh? Master Keykeeper and Kada? Well, I suppose it's not unheard of for keykeepers to marry mages, though not of the main lines. Too much responsibility.
I'm beginning to realize that.
Anwen said as she rolled her eyes, pausing to glance over at Tyler.
When I first heard all about this, I only found out I was a keykeeper. Then I found out I was the only one left and that it was my job to open the mountain. Not my idea of awesome. I didn't even know until Tyler told me.
Walter kicked back to watch the show. Part of him wished he had a tub of popcorn, and while he knew this woman was pretty much testing them, he couldn't help but feel amused by it all. After all, he wasn't the one in the hot seat. He had nothing to prove and chose to just go along for the ride. Leslie turned her attention to Tyler, with a hint more intent than she'd shown earlier.
So, this is all because you decided to set things in motion, hmm? Makes me curious about who you are. You're not a mage. At least I don't think you are. So, just who and what are you?
Tyler gave a tight-lipped smile.
I'm nothing more or less than what I present myself to be.
He answered.
When you're ready for the truth, I'll tell you. If it helps, I didn't tell Anwen until after she had already unsealed the gates of eternity.
Are you always this elusive?
Leslie asked as she leaned forward, coming to a full upright position. She caught a knowing look from Anwen out of the corner of her eye.
You enjoy keeping people in the dark, don't you? Well, I'm certain the time for being in the dark is over.
She straightened up, shoulders squared.
Let's stop playing games now, shall we?
The dragon didn't so much as flinch at her tone, knowing the gloves were finally coming off. Pretense aside, he knew this woman had more to her than she let show, much as he did.
I would love to stop playing games,
He confirmed.
so long as you're willing to do so as well. You and I may be used to diplomacy in some form of politics, but Anwen is not.
Realization hit Anwen like a bolt of lightning.
Wait, you mean she doesn't believe me? Even with the ring and the key?
She looked shocked at the idea.
But I'm telling the truth. Why would I lie?
Leslie shrugged.
Why should you tell the truth? It goes both ways. And in times like now, we can't afford to be sloppy.
Anwen stood with heated energy, her hands balled in frustration.
What is it with everyone? Seriously, just how many times do I have to freaking prove that I'm who I say I am? It's not like I chose this. Thank Kern for that. Because he's the one who just had to play the matchmaker. I was fine and dandy just being plain old Anwen, but no! Your stupid prophecies had to come out and snatch me like a thief in the night.
Her chest heaved as she paused in her tirade. Even though there had been triumphs, they had all come at a cost. Ever since she'd set foot on the Draconia Mountains to fulfill her father's dying request, what had she been thinking? If only she'd stayed home like her mother had wanted in the first place. Or had her mother wanted that? It was hard to tell anymore.
I'm sorry you guys get stuck with someone like me.
She continued, losing steam.
I really am. I didn't ask for this. We're all stuck together for however long this goes. So either we trust each other or we don't. There's no in between. If you doubt who I am, test me. Let me prove it so we can get on with the real reason we're here.
Walter couldn't help but bite his lip. He'd known something like this would happen eventually, though he wasn't so sure about the timing. After that outburst she'd had with him only a few nights ago, it was only a matter of time before it came out in front of Tyler. Well, there was no helping it now, he supposed. Tyler looked at her with wide eyes.
I never knew you felt like that.
He admitted.
Why didn't you say something?
Anwen snorted.
What good would that have done? It's not like I have much choice in the matter. It's all been a whirlwind of craziness since I first met you. I haven't had time to find my footing, let alone let you have it. And nothing is slowing down, not even with Kern. What choice do I have? This world seems bent on taking every last drop from me. I'm only here because you gave me part of your soul. If it weren't for that, I'd be dead. I've already lost my mom and dad. What else should we see if I can lose?
She wiped angry tears from her eyes. Sarah adjusted her position, looking almost like she was calculating whether or not Anwen's tirade presented a threat or not. She settled back down when the walker sat up a bit more in her chair, giving her a sidelong glance and subtle shake of the head that happened so fast only one person in the room noticed. Leslie slowly clapped.
And there's the real you.
She stated as if her bodyguard hadn't momentarily thought about tearing their guests apart.
And though I'm still not sure about the Kada claim, I can at least accept you for what you are at this moment. At the very least, I know you are a mage. And what about you?
She returned her attention to Tyler.
Pretenses aside, why don't you tell me who you are?
Tyler let out his breath as he stood.
My name is Damon, though I also go by the name Tyler Durand. My father is Kern Nurim.
Power flowed through him, exciting the molecules in the air until they crackled. His words seemed to give Leslie pause as she mentally backed up. She sat back heavily on her chair, looking a bit dazed.
You are that, Damon. Second in command to the Nurim. He who stayed behind when all others slumbered in the mountain.
The very same.
Tyler confirmed.
If you wish, I will allow you to test Anwen. But I must warn you that she has only recently become aware of her full heritage and her skills are lacking. Despite that, I'm sure she could give you a few surprises, if you're up to the challenge.
His eyes glinted with hints of amber deep within the blue depths. Walter looked between the two, watching the invisible sparks fly. Leslie was a force to be reckoned with, but she was no match for Tyler.
You know something?
He commented.
I would pay to watch you and Anwen have a go at each other.
Anwen gave him a dirty look.
Really? What happened to being my friend? I thought you were on my side.
The veteran shrugged, aware that the others had turned their attention to him as well.
No, I am on your side. But I just think it would be interesting to watch, you know? In fact, I pay good money for that opportunity. You're not going to improve unless you can go against someone who will test your skills. So, why not her?
He pointed his thumb at the walker.
Are you kidding me?
Anwen balked.
She'd make mincemeat of me. Even Courtney's better at this whole mage thing than I am, and you want me to go up against the best person in this place? Are you insane?
Walter only smiled as he folded his arms across his chest as he made himself comfortable.
You want to learn your craft? I can't think of a better way. Margot would say the same thing. You know she would.
Anwen shook her head.
Can you please leave my mother out of this? We all know she was an overachiever who pushed everyone to their limits. I really don't need this right now.
But Tyler disagreed.
No, he's right.
He held up a hand to silence her protests.
Hear me out. We're not questioning your ability, but we all know you need to work on your skills. It's not your fault you weren't taught all this when you were young. If we had to blame anyone for that, we can blame my father. He knew what you'd be up against long before you were born.
Leslie took that opportunity to step forward.
It's settled then.
She announced.
We'll test your skills this evening in the main square. And I hope, For your sake. You're ready for this.
She gave her an odd look as she left the room, motioning for Sarah to follow her out. Anwen couldn't help but look alarmed, unable to voice an objection. This woman exhibited as much, if not more, authority than her mother had. She looked towards her two companions for understanding. When they didn't respond, she realized there'd be no help from either of them. Whether she liked it or not, she had to face off with the walker.